The ever-venerable Lord, 3rd Hokage stared out from the windows of his office, mulling over the appearance of the sprawling village while nursing his smoking pipe. As was customary with the upcoming 3rd exam, the foreign delegations would soon be arriving at the village. With the hidden rock participating in this year's exam, that would make 3 Kage gathered within his village's walls, himself, the Kazekage and the Tsuchikage. As of late, communication with the Kazekage had largely been through indirect mediums. If all things went well, they would be able to redefine and clarify their alliance through this upcoming meeting. As for the Tsuchikage, what was the stubborn old Inoki hoping to gain out of this? His best intelligence operatives were on the case, but he supposed he would find out from the man himself soon enough. As for that other matter, Hiruzen turned around to face the red-haired ninja waiting behind his desk. Thank you, Naruto. Naruto's report had been thorough and informative, consisting of his observations of the foreign participants of the exams. It matched those of all his other informants, particularly when it came to the genin from the hidden sand. Yet, despite finding out about the other Jinchuriki, Naruto's reaction was surprisingly subdued. Quite an impressive poker face, Hiruzen thought to himself. He supposed it had always been good from the start, though where it had once seemed the side effect of a boy who did not know how to interpret his own emotions, it was now the impassive mask of a fully trained ninja. I've kept you from resting long enough, forgive me. Take the 2 weeks before the 3rd exam to recover and settle your business. Yes, Hokage-sama. Ah, and one last thing, Naruto, I've decided to start the process to promote you as a jonin. You can expect a summons for a formal ceremony of appointment sometime next week. Yes, Hokage-sama. Will that be all? Yes. You're dismissed. In a flurry of smoke, Naruto disappeared. Hiruzen felt himself sweat. He'd saved the good news for last, and had expected a little more of a reaction than neutral acceptance. Quite an impressive poker face, he again thought to himself with a puff of his pipe. While it was a strange feeling, being in an enemy's hospital, Ajisai vastly preferred it to wasting away alone in their quarters. Out of all the AIM teams that had started the Chunin exams, the only remaining participant was Haku, and the rest had already left the village. All she was doing was staring down at Haku's sleeping face, but Ajisai could feel sweat accumulating on her palms. Even though the Lady Angel had assigned such an important mission to their team, everything was falling apart. Suiren had died, Ajisai herself had failed to get through the preliminaries, and as for Haku, there was something very wrong with her teammate. Ever since that mysterious snake-like shinobi had bit him, he had drifted in and out of varying states of lucidity. Thankfully, the situation was no longer as dire as it had been in the forest, whereupon Ajisai had to nurse him for much of the remaining time. It was by pure luck that a relatively weak team wandered into the various traps Ajisai had set up around their campsite, allowing her to snag their scroll. Just once, back in the forest when Haku had been in his most vulnerable state, Ajisai had managed to see where the snake shinobi had bit him. There, she had seen what looked like 3 black marks circling each other, a seal. As much as Ajisai had studied Fuinjutsu back in the Hidden Rain, she knew at a glance that it was far beyond her capabilities. Before losing consciousness, Haku had warned her not to allow the leaf medic Nin to examine him too closely. As much as she worried about his state, Ajisai agreed, nothing good could come out of handing over any more information to their enemy than they had to. Worst came to worst, as much as she hated to burden the Lady Angel any more than she had to, Ajisai had little doubt that their savior would be able to remove the seal. The shortest passage from the Hokage's office to his apartment took Naruto through the market, and as always, a flurry of whispering followed wherever he went. In the past, he had used the transformation technique to avoid their stares, but this time, he gave himself up to their scrutiny. Jonin. The rank that had once been Naruto's goal was now finally within his grasp. Jonin. Naruto tasted the word in his mouth, but it was the same as his initial reaction, he felt nothing. It meant that he would be given missions of higher difficulty, and that he had the option of going solo. It also meant, if the Hokage so chose, that he was eligible to be assigned a genin team of his own to train. To anyone else, the rank represented responsibility and recognition. To Naruto, it was an empty word that rang hollowly in his ears. So hollowly, it almost worried him. When he reached his apartment, he immediately noticed 2 things. 1, someone had raided his desk and stolen his copy of Jiraiya's latest book. And 2, there was a note waiting for him on his kitchen table. If you want your book back, meet me at Area 15. It took about a half-day's journey by foot past the gates of Konohagakure before Jiraiya was finally unable to sense any scouts within his immediate perimeter. The village had beefed up security in preparation for the Chunin exams, particularly along their shared borders with grass and sound territory, and for good reason, what with the constant flow of foreign ninja passing through fire country. Within the first few kilometers radius of their village, a rabbit couldn't nibble on a leaf without the intelligence division knowing about it. Jiraiya, however, was not a rabbit, and it was a simple matter to shake off any eyes that may have followed him from the village, no doubt, under the orders of Danzo. He really hated that man. If Jiraiya had his way, Danzo would have been ousted from his position of power years ago. Unfortunately, the Lord Third had always had a soft spot for his old comrade, believing wholeheartedly that everything Danzo did was for the sake of the village. In Jiraiya's private thoughts, it was a misguided opinion, and it was only out of complete respect for his former teacher that he did not voice them publicly. As always, the message from the shadow was waiting for Jiraiya in the promised location, a scroll, nestled in a tree hollow. It wasn't very long, they never were, but the words seized Jiraiya's heart in a tight grip of apprehension. Another pillar crumbles under the weight of the rising sun. The lone leaf, caught in the eye of the storm. Jiraiya swallowed the scroll as soon as he'd committed the words to memory, and it settled in his stomach as a cold, hard lump. In the years since Jiraiya had stumbled across the shadow, or rather, the shadow had found him, he'd never before received such an ominous message. The rising sun could only mean Akatsuki, a group named to mean daybreak, and if his interpretation was correct, the crumbling pillar represented a Jinchuriki. Most likely, given the imagery, one under the jurisdiction of the hidden rock, making it the fourth Jinchuriki to fall into the hands of the criminal organization. No doubt, that had something to do with the village's participation in the Leaf's Chunin exams. As for the latter sentence, it was clearly a warning, one that Jiraiya was already well aware of. An impending disaster was rapidly approaching the hidden leaf, and when it came down to it, the village would be friendless. Inevitably, Jiraiya's thoughts turned toward the shadow. That was what he called his informant in his mind, for they had never revealed their identity. And while any attempts at elucidate their identity had led to a dead end, their information until now had always proven accurate. Given the level of confidentiality of the information, they had to be a powerful ninja intimately connected to Akatsuki, and it had to be someone who prioritized their loyalty to the hidden leaf over their own life. By the foot of a nearby tree, the grass rustled. Jiraiya watched a harmless green snake slither by, carving its passage through the dirt before disappearing underground. Of course, deep inside, Jiraiya had his own suspicions of who it could be. But he had been disappointed one too many times beforehand to get his hopes up. It didn't take long for Naruto to find the culprit behind the note. It was a masked jonin sitting on the branches of a large tree in the middle of an otherwise empty field, giggling to himself from behind the pages of an Ika book. The book was the newest addition to the franchise, a first edition hot off the press. Autographing it with a flourish, Jiraiya had pressed it into Naruto's hands, claiming that it was his reward for his diligence as an pupil over the years, never mind the fact that Naruto was still underage. If you wanted to read it that badly, you could have just asked, Naruto called up to the jonin. Having been completely absorbed in the book's contents, Kakashi almost looked surprised to see Naruto. Ah, Naruto. I could have asked, but where's the fun in that? Closing the book, Kakashi jumped down to the ground. Ambling over, he clapped Naruto by the shoulder. I heard from the Lord Third that you're going to be made a jonin. Congratulations. Thank you, Kakashi-sensei. His gaze lowering, Kakashi smiled faintly. Mayu and Rai would have been very proud of you. Yes, I suppose, Naruto replied, inclining his head. How have you been settling in? I've been keeping busy, under the orders of Hokage-sama. Though the genin from the hidden sand have been lying low, so it's been mostly quiet. Ahem. I see. That must be quite the nightmare for those in charge. Despite the consolatory words, Kakashi's tone sounded alarmingly cheerful, an afterglow of Jiraiya's books, perhaps. Anyways, your promotion merits some kind of celebration, don't you think? Kakashi tucked the book carefully away into his flak jacket. Are you ready for our rematch? At last, Naruto felt a smile creep to his face as well. The last time Naruto had truly faced off against Kakashi had been the day of their bell test. While Naruto had managed to snag a bell for their team then, it had been a match between a teacher and his pupils, meant to gauge their teamwork rather than test their battle prowess. That was no longer the case. They were no longer in a forested terrain, a training ground meant to teach a genin how to utilize his surroundings. They faced each other on an open field as equals, the wind whipping through the grass at their feet. The winner will be whoever remains standing, said Naruto. He had zero intentions of holding back. With his imminent appointment to Jonin and Kakashi having his own team to handle, who knew when he'd next get a chance to properly measure his progress against Kakashi. Kakashi accepted his proposal with an easy smile. We'll still go out for ramen after this, I assume. There won't be any lingering hard feelings. Sure, if you can still stomach anything by the end of it, Naruto retorted. There was an opening pause, as each sized the other up. The few times he'd seen Kakashi fight seriously, the Jonin had always been a terrifying sight to behold. On top of his prodigious base speed and taijutsu, his use of the Sharingan granted him mastery over at least 4 basic nature transformations, giving him a leg up over Naruto, who had mainly focused on honing his lightning and wind jutsu. No, the key to success would not be through superior technique. When it came to Kakashi, Naruto's best strategy would be to take advantage of where he had an edge, and simply overpower him. The seconds ticked by, and Naruto struck first. The sound of metal against metal rang harshly through the air as Naruto's tanto met Kakashi's kunai. Their blades shook, neither of them giving ground, when Naruto's tanto suddenly pushed forward as Kakashi leapt back into the air. Katan, Gokakyu no Jutsu, Fire Release, Fireball Technique. Naruto flipped back just as a roaring fireball slammed into the ground where he had been standing, its heat warming his face as his hands blurred into action midair. Kage Bunshin no Jutsu, Shadow Clone Technique. In a smoking cloud, 4 of his clones appeared beside him. Evading another fireball that seared the ground by their feet, one took advantage of the smoke cover to disappear while the remaining 3 shot forward, convening on the Jonin from all directions. Countering one clone's tanto with a kunai, Kakashi spun and kicked aside another clone. The third clone plunged its tanto into Kakashi's chest, and with a burst of smoke, the Jonin disappeared, leaving just Naruto and his clones. Naruto quickly scanned the area, feeling the ground beneath them tremor. He leaped away just as a pair of hands broke through the earth, latching onto one of his clone's feet. His clone's self yelped as he was dragged down into the ground, before dissipating. Kakashi broke through to the surface and blocked Naruto's sweeping kick before flipping over his head and retaliating with a series of precisely aimed blows. Lightning crackled. Kakashi's hands seemed to slow down in midair for Naruto. Weaving between them, he thrust the hilt of his tanto into Kakashi's chest. At the last instant, in a true testimony to the speed of his reflexes, Kakashi veered back, but Naruto's tanto glanced across his sternum, and the force of the blow blew the Jonin back, leaving gashes through the ground. His remaining clones weren't idle, choosing then to rush at Kakashi. The Jonin stomped the ground, and a block of rock erupted out, ramming into a clone that disappeared. The remaining 2 ran across the walls of the block, before tackling Kakashi, who promptly dissipated. This time, however, it wasn't just an ordinary shadow clone. Instead, it sent out a spark of blinding lightning that promptly sent a shock of 1,000,000 volts running through Naruto's clones. They promptly disappeared, and their combined experiences of being hit by lightning struck Naruto like a sledgehammer. It seemed that Kakashi had used the diversion of the block to instantaneously replace himself with a lightning clone. Naruto had to hand it to his former teacher. It was a move mixing both defensive and offensive strategy that would have debilitated most other ninja. Of course, it was painful, but Naruto had suffered through much worse. The lightning faded, leaving black steam sizzling off of Naruto, who nonetheless remained standing, to Kakashi's blatant surprise. Jiraiya-sama really put you through the ringer in your training, didn't he? Kakashi replied wryly. Despite their soon-to-be equal standing, it seemed Kakashi was finding it rather hard to let go of his teacher mentality. The way he was holding back in the match made it apparent that rather than trying to win, he was trying to draw out and evaluate everything Naruto had learned over the years. Well, Naruto was more than happy to show him some of the results of his training. A spinning ball of churning chakra appeared in each of Naruto's hands. You're going to have to get a little more serious, Kakashi-sensei. Reaching up with a hand, Kakashi raised his Hitaiate to reveal a red eye with spinning tomo. I could say the same to you, Naruto. It didn't take long for Karen's teammates to fall asleep. The sedative she'd sprinkled in their plates just before the meal was her own homegrown concoction, grinded down from the roots of a plant native to their country. In small doses, it sufficed as a painkiller for the bite marks on her arms. The amount she'd used was enough to knock out a large mammal, an apt descriptor for her constantly eating teammate. While she wouldn't have dared to pull something like this back in grass country, where she was almost constantly under strict supervision, when they were all the way out here in foreign territory, she had a little more leeway. Now, with the 2 snoring into their rice bowls, Karen was free to pursue her own agenda without any fear of retaliation. Closing her eyes, she focused, and in an instant, she found him. To her disappointment, he wasn't alone. It looked as though he was fighting against another vibrant chakra signature, but there was no killing intent in either of the two. A sparring match, then. The day was warm and sunny. There was barely a cloud in the sky as Karen crossed the village, leaping across the rooftops in her haste. Despite the heavy security she'd sensed spread throughout the village, or perhaps as a result of it, the civilians passing below her feet seemed to be enjoying their daily mundane lives. Several of them noticed her running by, and then returned to their business without a second glance. It made a stark difference from Kusagakure. Though they were technically in peacetime, given its near vicinity with multiple other countries, they were always having border disputes. There was never a day when the medical tents weren't overflowing with the wounded, a military effort that drained their civilians of their entire livelihoods, leaving them embittered and driven by self-interest. These people don't know how good they have it, Karen thought wistfully. 4 wind release Rasengan barrages later, Kakashi had somehow managed to emerge with just the single purpling bruise on his chest and a sheen of sweat on his brow. But there was not even a single moment to rest, as more of Naruto's clones threw themselves at him. He was pretty sure the real Naruto was somewhere nearby, plotting something nasty, no doubt. Unfortunately, with his clones constantly on the offensive, Kakashi couldn't afford even a single opening in his defense without the risk of being obliterated by a souped-up Rasengan. Naruto had been strong enough to be considered for a Jonin appointment even before he'd left on the mission to Wave Country. However, now, after several years under Jiraiya's tutelage, it seemed he'd returned with a much more efficient and polished skill set, attacking with a punishing pace meant to wear down any opponent. Given Naruto's massive chakra reserves, with a good strategy, he'd be able to outlast almost anyone. But, this wasn't the extent of it. If it had been anyone else, Kakashi would have accepted these improvements as a fine result of their years of training. Because it was Naruto, however, Kakashi knew there was something still up his sleeve. As for whether he would be able to draw it out of him, well, Kakashi had joked about the student surpassing the teacher, but now, he was starting to feel like it wasn't so funny after all. His chakra reserves were starting to run low. If Kakashi wanted to emerge from this without losing face, he'd have to end it here and now. Another Naruto clone leaped at him, dodging the kick. Kakashi grabbed the clone by the arm and threw it at another clone. As the clones momentarily fell back, Kakashi concentrated lightning chakra into his hand, and the sound of 1,000 chirping birds filled the air. He shot towards the clones, the ground breaking at his feet with every step. His Chidori ripped through the clones at such a speed that they all burst into nothingness in the same instant. Where was Naruto? There, by the tree. His eyes were closed. Was he seriously sleeping? No. He was meditating. It was too late to turn back now. Kakashi's Chidori was already bearing down on Naruto. Was it a clone? Suddenly, Naruto vanished. A looming metal gate in the darkness, locked by a single seal. A lurking demon just beyond it, waiting for its one chance to break free. Naruto was almost starting to get used to the sight. You again, snarled the Ninetales. What do you want now? What I always want, said Naruto. Stop getting in the way of my chakra. The Ninetales let out a guttural laugh that echoed through the darkness. Your chakra, you say? I have prowled this world, free, for a millennia, but my chakra has been flowing through you since the moment your flimsy existence was conceived. You have known me for the entire length of your short, miserable life, but for me, this is merely a temporary jail. And when I break free, I will claim what is mine. Naruto didn't reply. This wasn't the first time the Ninetales had gone off on him. However, he knew they weren't empty threats. Thanks to Jiraiya, he knew that the 8 trigram seal used to seal the Ninetales within him was growing weaker over time. In fact, the more Naruto used the demon's chakra, the weaker the seal would grow, and the more easily it would be able to take control of his body. Jiraiya had also introduced the toad with the key to his seal to Naruto in the midst of their basic Fuinjutsu lesson. Minato knew that the seal would weaken over time, and he entrusted the key to me to strengthen the seal when the time came. Jiraiya paused, and looked up from the flickering campfire. But Naruto, from the way this seal was set up, I believe he intended for you to be able to use the Ninetales chakra. If you want, I can use this key to weaken the seal instead, and help you start utilizing its power. No, Naruto replied flatly. I won't rely on a power that I can't completely control. Isn't there a seal that will completely block the Ninetales from taking over my body, but let me use its chakra? Wearing a thoughtful look, Jiraiya stroked his chin. The tailed beasts aren't just chakra pumps, Naruto. While they aren't exactly living beings, they have individual personalities that cannot be suppressed. The seal used on you is one of the strongest seals I know of. But the most important thing I learned in my own Fuinjutsu studies in Whirlpool Country is that if there's a will, there is always a way. Jiraiya lowered his hand and gave Naruto an appraising stare. How is your sage training going? Naruto opened his eyes. The first clone he had sent out in the midst of his fight with Kakashi was finally ready. Given Naruto's contract with a fox, gathering natural energy always took longer in the daytime, in the absence of moonlight. But with a clone hidden away to gather energy while he distracted his opponent, it was more than feasible. His clone disappeared just before Kakashi's Chidori ripped it apart, and Naruto felt the natural energy immediately filling his body, waking up senses he hadn't even realized he'd been missing. Suddenly, he knew exactly how many blades of grass remained in the field. He could sense the Hokage pacing in his office all the way on the other side of the village, the Aim Hunter Nin lying in a hospital bed, the Suna Genin lurking in the foreigner's quarters, and the Kusa Genin was getting alarmingly close. The balance wasn't perfect, what with the Nine-Tails chakra acting as a constant interference, like a giant boulder blocking a river. Nor would it last long, there was only enough energy to last him a few seconds, at best. But it would have to be enough. Sorry, Kakashi-sensei, he thought. I'm going to need you to get a little more serious. The Naruto that had vanished had been a clone. Kakashi swung around immediately, searching for Naruto's chakra signature, and he found it. Kakashi's eyes widened. Naruto must have been hidden underground, for he erupted out now, directly before Kakashi. It was oddly reminiscent of their first fight during the bell test, when Naruto had leaped out of a hole in the ground to grab a bell off of Kakashi. But that wasn't what took him by surprise, no, it was Naruto's chakra itself. Where it had been enormous before, it was now colossal, churning as though it yearned to break free of its vessel. What was more, Naruto's appearance had changed. His eyes were red, almost ferally so, and his hair had grown longer and shaggier in a way that fleetingly reminded him of the boy's parents. Had the Nine-Tails taken control again? But no, this felt different from before. Somehow, Naruto was in perfect control. All of this ran through Kakashi's head in the split second that he glimpsed Naruto shooting towards him. The next instant, he felt Naruto's foot collide into his chest, precisely where he'd previously struck with his hilt. Something audibly cracked and he flew back, tumbling through the dirt and grass. Grimacing, before he lost complete control, Kakashi plunged his kunai into the ground to forcibly stop himself, the momentum nearly ripping the skin off his hands. When his body finally skidded to a stop, he let go of the kunai. Letting his hand drop to his side, he exhaled. His ribs hurt, he'd definitely fractured something. Soon, he heard Naruto's steps approach him. That was a little much on an old man like me, Kakashi grumbled. That's what happens when you hold back, came Naruto's dry voice. A thought struck him, and Kakashi checked his chest pocket. To his relief, the novel he'd tucked away was miraculously still in one piece. As Naruto's imperfect sage mode faded away, he could feel the influence on his body disappearing as well. His clawed appendages reverted to fingers and toes, and his hair shrank to its normal cropped length. As the energy seeped back into his surroundings, he could feel a dull sense of tiredness settling over him, rather like he was coming down from a severe adrenaline rush. He looked around at the field, or at least, what remained of it. While Area 15 had once been a level plain, it now more closely resembled a minefield. Wincing, Kakashi stood up, brushing the dirt off his legs. Well, Naruto, we've got a lot left to discuss, it seems. Before that, Sensei, there's someone I need to talk to, said Naruto, turning to look towards the edge of the field. The girl from the hidden grass was waiting there. Even if Naruto hadn't sensed her coming, her spiky red hair made her a difficult sight to miss. At that moment, she appeared to be staring at him in a shell-shocked sort of way. Kakashi did a double take. And then, he shook his head. It's like I don't even know you anymore, Naruto. Naruto felt himself sweat. It's not what you think it is. Of course, said Kakashi lightly. Well, I have to drop by the hospital to get my ribs checked out anyways. Let's get dinner some other time, go enjoy your date. Making an ironic salute with his fingers towards Naruto, the Jonin limped resolutely away in the opposite direction. Naruto followed his progress for a few seconds, before turning back to the matter at hand. The Genin, Karen, was it, had been trailing him before, in the forest of death, and had offered up a smile during the preliminaries. And now, she'd even tracked him down to this remote training field. What did she want from him? Did she have any compromising information on him? In the short time that Naruto had interacted with Karen at the exams, she'd seemed to be a fairly proficient and put-together kunoichi. Now, for some reason, she looked bashful as she approached him. Uzumaki Naruto. Do you remember me? She asked, her eyes darting up to his face, before looking down. This odd indecision between his face and her shoes continued to repeat itself. We fought in the Chunin exams in Sunagakure, Naruto replied. Is there a reason you've been following me? Karen's face lit up. So you do remember me. I'm so glad. I just wanted to know. She squirmed. If you have a girlfriend. Naruto blinked. Is that all you wanted to know? He asked. Karen nodded furiously. Without responding, Naruto began to walk away. This wasn't the first time someone had tried to flirt with him. Ever since his growth spurt, he'd noticed a dramatic increase in interest from the girls within his vicinity. More than a few times, they turned out to be a kunoichi bent on getting information out of him and Jiraiya, and unlike the latter, who somehow always fell for their advances, Naruto had long since learned to tune them out. Wait, I wanted to thank you, shouted Karen from behind him. For the fish you left behind. Despite himself, Naruto stopped and turned around. What do you mean? This time, Karen looked straight into his face. In grass country. I was starving, and you left behind one of the fish for me from the river. It saved me. Thank you. Grass country. Fish. A basket. A vague recollection replayed itself in Naruto's mind. That had been her. He'd caught a glimpse of her retreating, and thought it had been a civilian down on their luck. How had a kunoichi as capable as her ended up in such a sorry state? You're welcome, he said at last. I'm so glad you grew up hot, added Karen, a bead of drool dangling from the side of her mouth. Women are all the same, Naruto thought to himself, and walked away. On the first day of the second test of the Chunin exams. It was the first time in a while that a messenger bird with an urgent summons to the Hokage's council had tapped on the shoulder of every veteran jonin in the village. Heeding the call, the chamber was soon filled with clouds of smoke from multiple jonin body flickering in. One of the Chunin exam proctors had reported to the Hokage her shocking findings of a team of faceless corpses. The photo evidence was now presented to the jonin. While disturbed, most of them seemed blissfully ignorant of its implications. However, a select few immediately turned pale. The vanishing facial copy technique. But that can't be. Predictably, it was Anko who would baldly spit out the name of the culprit. Orochimaru. That snake is back. Yes, said the Hokage heavily. I, too, believe he has returned. It cannot be coincidence that this has happened in the midst of the Chunin exams, when our village is filled with foreign ninja. Should we cancel the exams then? No. Orochimaru knows that this technique would give him away in an instant. And yet, he left those bodies out in plain view. He is challenging us, and losing our composure is not the right choice to make here. But Hokage-sama. That means our suspicions are true and that Akatsuki is involved. The Hokage's face turned grim. If only that was the least of it. We have reason to suspect that Orochimaru is connected to not just Akatsuki but other hidden villages, perhaps even our allies. You think our allies would partner with Akatsuki and betray Konoha? Well, the treaties of alliance are really no more than verbal agreements. Kakashi interjected. It's just like the world wars of the past. In any case, right now we still have too little information. We must not make too many assumptions. The Konoha councilwoman added, we have already dispatched ANBU Black Ops to each nation to gather intelligence. It is imperative that we not make a single careless move. Our enemies will pounce on any such opportunity. The Hokage looked around at his agents. I have the utmost confidence in all of you. If it comes to it, we shall consolidate all of the Hidden Leaf's strength and fight. It was cold. Snow drifted down from the sky, covering the bridge in white and melting away where it touched his bare skin. A cold wind brushed against him. He shivered. But he had nowhere to go. The blood on his face had long since dried up and crusted over. He was all alone. The snow continued to drift by. Slowly. Serenely. He wondered, if he closed his eyes, would the rest of the world disappear? Suddenly, a dark shadow fell on him, and he looked up. There was a tall man there, a ninja. Bandages covered most of his face, leaving just a pair of dark eyes. The man spoke in a low, brusque voice. Do you want to be needed by someone? Can you give everything to me? In a trance, he stood up. His eyes fixed on the face of the ninja before him, he felt his heart throb. He took a step and another, and then the man rested his hand on the top of his head. His eyes filled with tears. It had been too long since he last saw the man. He felt the man pull him to his side. But when the man spoke again, it was a hiss, "Come find me when your own strength can take you no further." His heart dropping in his chest, he looked up, and instead of a bandaged face, he saw now the head of a snake, its maw opened with wicked fangs bearing down on him. "Haku," shouted a familiar voice. "Ajisai." Everything was blurry. His head was spinning. One moment, a snake was about to tear into him, the next, his teammate was standing over him. But it was too painful to think, to be awake. Haku felt everything fade away into black. Unlike the Chunin promotion, which hinged on the evaluation of the host village conducting the Chunin exam, the Jonin promotion was by appointment of one's own Kage only. It was also a much more subdued ceremony. Naruto distinctly remembered the excessively elaborate sand structures from his own Chunin certification event. "Do you swear your loyalty to the village of Konohagakure and to the incumbent Hokage?" "Yes." "Do you swear to protect the village and its people, and to take its secrets to your grave?" "Yes." "Then I appoint you, Uzumaki Naruto, to the rank of Jonin, under allegiance to the village of Konohagakure. Henceforth, you will respond solely to me, for as long as I hold the title of Hokage." "Yes, Hokage-sama." Eyes beaming out from below his hat, the Hokage regarded Naruto proudly. "You've done well. Minato and Kushina would have been proud of you, as would have your old teammates." "Thank you. It is customary that a Jonin go on his first mission solo." That being said, the Hokage's smile faded. "I have a pertinent update for you, Naruto. I have received information that all but confirms that the Akatsuki have started to make a move against the Hidden Leaf." Akatsuki, the mercenary group that was hunting down Jinchuriki. He'd encountered 2 of their members in Wave Country, even with the power of the Nine Tails, he'd barely managed to kill one of them. And now, it seemed they were bearing down on Fire Country. Perhaps sensing Naruto's unspoken questions, the Hokage continued. "I have decided not to cancel the Chunin exams. However, in order to gather more information, I have sent out many operatives, and this concerns my urgent mission for you. You will escort a medic Nin to aid a wounded undercover agent in Earth Country who may be in possession of vital information, and bring both of them back to our village before the start of the 3rd exam. This is a mission of A-rank difficulty. Discretion is the rule. The IWA Nin must never find out that we have been spying on them." "You think the Akatsuki won't attack before the 3rd exam?" "It is unlikely. They will be waiting for when the foreign delegations have all arrived, that is, when we are at our most vulnerable." Naruto paused. While his next question was impertinent for his position, he figured they had been sidestepping the issue for long enough. "Did your council have you request this mission of me?" For a long moment, the Hokage mulled over the question on his pipe. And then he sighed. "No, they did not. Given your Jinchuriki status, they would prefer to keep you close by. And I feel the same way, Naruto. You must consider me a puppet, dancing to the tune of my advisors, and by extension, the village. Perhaps over the years, that has become the case." The Hokage spread out his hands. "However, putting all that aside, Naruto, you are not just a Jinchuriki. You are a Jonin now, with qualifications that make you suitable for this mission. That being the case, will you accept it?" The Hokage's face had been lined with wrinkles for as long as Naruto could remember. When he was a child, the Hokage had always seemed ancient, a legendary piece of history, in a phrase, the god of shinobi, as some called him. As Naruto had grown older, the Hokage had become a leader behind a mask, someone with ulterior motives, someone whose true face he couldn't see. "Yes, Hokage-sama," replied Naruto. An unreadable emotion flickered in the Hokage's eyes. "Thank you, Naruto." As always, the small, cynical voice in Naruto told him that this show of vulnerability was yet another tool at the Hokage's disposal to bend him to his will. But in that instant, he thought he'd caught a glimpse of the face behind the mask. With the sudden change in plans, it was decided that Naruto would leave for the mission at sunset. Time was sensitive, and although getting to Earth Country on his own wouldn't have been an issue, he would have to deal with not just the medic Nin, but possibly an injured operative, all the while avoiding detection from IWA Nin. Certainly, a challenging mission for a Jonin barely 5 minutes into his initiation. Still, what with Kakashi busy these days training his Chunin team, and Jiraiya having disappeared on his own business, Naruto thought it would make a nice change in pace from skulking around the village. There wasn't anything Naruto needed to pack for the mission. Over his years of travel with Jiraiya, he had learned to become self-sufficient and knew how to obtain food and shelter no matter where he went. Still, just in case. When Naruto left his apartment, his clone stared back at him just before he closed the door. As he headed to the gates, where he'd been told the medic Nin would be waiting for him, he looked up at the stone faces of the Hokage monument that bore down on the village. Several people had told Naruto that he greatly resembled his father, the fourth Hokage. It was part of the reason why he kept his hair cropped short. He had never known his father, and if he wanted to endure the world around him, he had to live his life in the present, not the past. And yet, he couldn't help but think, now what? He had once wanted to become strong enough to protect those he cared about. But after Rai and Mayu had died, there was something he had realized, though he hadn't been able to put it into words at the time. No matter how strong you were, when it mattered the most, all of that power couldn't save anyone. Because in the end, everyone was alone. Naruto wasn't the only one who had lost his team. Kakashi had as well. The same could be said for Jiraiya, the Hokage. The most powerful people he knew hadn't been able to save the ones they'd wanted to protect. With all his years of experience, Kakashi had said that all they could do was to endure. That was what being a ninja meant. However, Naruto had thought there was more to it than that. That there had to be more than that. So he had traveled the world in search of all the things that he couldn't understand. But rather than finding answers, he had only found more questions. Until now, each step of his way had been obvious to him. It had been easy to move forward when he could clearly see where it would take him. But now, the way ahead was dark. Though he kept stepping forward, he no longer knew where it was that he was heading. Hyuga Hinata. At the sound of the unfamiliar voice, Hinata immediately answered, yes. She turned around, and felt her lips part in surprise. Him, of all people. While Hinata had known that a Jonin would be escorting her on her mission, she certainly hadn't expected the village's Pariato be the one to approach her. I'm Naruto, said the young man, as though there was anyone in the village who didn't know of him. Not to mention, they'd once been in the same academy class when they were younger. Are you ready to leave? Swallowing, Hinata nodded. Yes. Unceremoniously, they lined up at the exit gate, and soon, Hinata found herself trailing the Jonin along a well-trodden path. He didn't seem the talkative type, nor did she really want to hold a conversation with him. She didn't remember much of him from the short time they'd been in the same academy class, but she'd heard the stories about him from the other Chunin. While they acknowledged his skill, they all knew he wasn't someone you got involved with. There was also, of course, the one blemish on his otherwise spotless track record, the disaster of the wave incident from 3 years past. Both of Naruto's teammates had been killed in action, and though the specific details of the mission had never been released, after Naruto disappeared from the village, the majority opinion held that it had been his fault. And now he was mysteriously back, and Hinata was alone with him. Naruto had been examining the map, but suddenly, he turned towards her. You're a Chunin, right? Why yes, said Hinata. Starting to feel somewhat self-conscious of her repetitive replies, she added, only medical ninja who have received a Chunin certification are allowed to go on missions above C rank. I see. With that, Naruto put away his map and began to pick up his speed. It was apparent that he knew nothing about her. However, despite the fact that this was technically an escort mission, he obviously expected Hinata to carry her own weight. Somehow, that brought a small smile to her lips. It made a welcome change to be thought of in that way. In the crowds of Leaf Nin and foreign ninja alike streaming in and out of the village, nobody noticed the two Sunanin speaking quietly to one another. Everything is in place, said Baki. I will return to Wind Country now to report to the Lord Fourth. Make sure to keep Gaara under control, Temari. Temari hid her frown. Her given task was far easier said than done, but it was her duty, and she would see it through. It was the least she could do while her countrymen prepared for the inevitable war that rapidly approached. Yes, Baki. Safe travels. While she may have been the daughter of the Kazekage, she was currently no more than a glorified babysitter for Gaara. Nonetheless, they would play a critical role in their scheme against the Hidden Leaf, and if all went well, she would become a part of her father's inner circle. Of course, that was a big if. Even Temari, who only had a shadow of an idea of what was going to happen in the third exam, knew that the scale of their mission was nothing like they'd ever attempted before, the annihilation of a powerful hidden village, one of the major powers of their era. Once the dust had settled, what would the resulting world look like? By the time Temari returned to their quarters, the sun had set and the moon was a crescent in the sky. There was a dark figure standing outside the building. Temari froze, as she realized Gaara was waiting outside for her. However, a hurried glance at his face told her that, perhaps with the decreasing influence of the waning moon, he seemed to be in more control of himself. Slowly, she let out a breath that she hadn't realized she'd been holding. "Where were you?" was his cold greeting. "I was seeing Baki off." "Did you eat dinner?" Gaara didn't respond, instead looking sullenly away, meaning Temari would have to figure out dinner for the two of them. For the two of them. Not for the first time that week, a haze settled over her. For all her flippancies, Matsuri, their teammate, had been a good cook. Temari would miss her miso soup, in particular. With a heavy heart, she wondered how Baki would explain Matsuri's death to her family. Would it be killed in action like last time? Of course, everyone would instantaneously guess at what had truly come to pass. These days, with so many families having lost someone to Gaara, Temari found even herself, purely by association, being subjected to the villagers' hate-filled gazes. It hurt, when she had worked so hard and sacrificed so much for the sake of their people, but she couldn't blame them. A cloud must have covered the moon, as for a moment, everything was dark. Then the moment passed, and the glow of moonlight shone down on them. "I think I saw a ramen spot around here," said Temari, forcing herself to smile. "How does that sound to you?" As expected of a Hyuga, the medic Nin with pale eyes seemed to have no trouble keeping up with Naruto's steady pace through the wilderness of Fire Country. What was more surprising to Naruto was that a member of the main house of the Hyuga clan would have deigned to join the medical field at all, while an extremely difficult and accomplished field. The main impression that he'd gotten from his limited interactions with their branch members was that they were far too proud to play a mere supporting role. They had reached the border of grass country before the day was done, and in that time, they must have exchanged only a handful of sentences between them. He could feel the waves of curiosity coming off of her, though whether out of politeness or apprehension, she didn't voice any questions. On his end, Naruto refrained from commenting on Hinata's lineage. He'd butted heads with her clansman Niji enough as it was, ever since they'd first had the misfortune to meet in their Chunin exams. It wasn't until they were well into Earth territory that they finally ran into some trouble. Though Naruto had spent a non-insignificant amount of time in the country while traveling with Jiraiya, they had usually journeyed undercover as civilians, and went out of their way to avoid clashing with the foreign power. "If you ever get into a fight with someone from Earth country," Jiraiya would say, "you'd better plan on either losing the fight or killing them outright. Stubbornest people I've ever met, and I knew your mother." "Ha! You trying to pick a fight?" said the short, weasel-looking man blocking their way across the bridge. "It's simple, you want to cross, you pay the toll." "But it doesn't say anywhere that we have to pay a toll here," protested Hinata. The man gave her the stink eye. "You two don't look like you're from around here. What would you know about how we run things? Pay the passage of 300 Ryo, or I'll call the police on you, and you definitely didn't want that." Naruto knew for a fact that this was a bluff. The official police force of Iwagakure didn't bother patrolling this far from the hidden village. Even if there was a local police body around this area, it was most likely a hodgepodge group of volunteers, who were at best academy level. Still, as tempting as it was, he couldn't simply overpower him. While it was unlikely any passing Iwa Nin would pay attention to his blabbering, there was a much easier way to settle this matter. Naruto quickly assessed the situation. One of his clones that he'd sent out to check their surroundings was in the vicinity, and another passing traveler was approaching the bridge, making the setup complete. He pointed. "Aren't you going to charge that person too?" The weasel-like man turned around, and saw to his surprise a bald man about to step across the bridge. "Wait, stop right there. But, first, you two." One hand forming the ram seal behind his back, Naruto's other hand opened to reveal 3 gold coins that he wordlessly handed over. In a flash, the coins disappeared, and the man's menacing glare turned into a wide, beaming smile. "Have a good day." With a quick welcoming sweep towards the bridge, he scurried away towards his next bewildered victim. The golden coins rattled ominously in the man's breast pocket. "He's gone." Opening her eyes, Karen dropped to the ground. Somehow, in the short period of time while she'd been training her taijutsu, Naruto had managed to leave the village and her range. A mission? But for how long would he be gone? Suddenly, a spinning blob shot out at her. Gritting her teeth, Karen blocked the brunt of the blow with her arms, but the force still sent her reeling backwards. The blob came to a quick stop, revealing a large man with a shaved head, her teammate. Panting, Karen felt blood drip from her nose. "Burami," she heard Kazami admonish. "I told you to hold back a little." That's what she gets for zoning out, Burami sneered. You've been acting uppity ever since you made the finals, Karen. But don't forget that in the end, you're only good for your chakra. Karen bristled, but as usual, her throat constricted, and she didn't say anything back. She knew she'd only regret it when they returned to grass country. Clink, clink. More and more these days, it felt like her whole body was being restrained by chains. Chains that tied her to the hidden grass, to Zosui, and to herself. She hadn't felt this way, back when her mother had been alive, and sometimes, she wondered whether her mother had felt so trapped in her final moments. Karen dared not hope, and yet she couldn't help but wonder whether this chakra power of hers, the only thing that she was good for, would Naruto find it useful as well? Hinata looked down at her map, and then up at the narrow cave opening. She wouldn't have even noticed it, if Naruto had not pointed it out to her. This cave isn't on the map, she said hesitantly. It says that if we go around the base of the mountain, we'll eventually find a hidden stairwell. Naruto shook his head. That'll add another half day to the journey. I've been here before, this is the fastest way through. Okay, but just to confirm. Concentrating her chakra to her eyes, Hinata activated her Kekii Genkai, Byakugan. The secrets of her surroundings were unveiled to her, and she realized that he was right. The cave quickly widened out to a large man-made tunnel that traversed the mountain and emerged near their destination. As they made their way through the dark tunnel, Hinata deactivated her eyes and instantly lost all visibility. However, the way was straightforward enough, and there were no other nearby chakra signatures. Even if there had been, she doubted she would have noticed, what with Naruto's strange chakra following her. Her Byakugan allowed her to trace the chakra circulatory system of any individual within her range. Everyone, even civilians, had such a system. The main difference came from whether they were able to control their chakra flow, and their innate chakra reserves. But it looked as though Naruto had two sources of chakra. In a flash, it struck Hinata, did it have something to do with the reason why everyone thought he was a monster? Suddenly, she realized she could see the vague outline of the walls around them, the tunnel was growing lighter. They were still only halfway through, so it couldn't be sunlight. They soon emerged into a small cavern filled with a glowing pale light. Hinata walked over to the walls and to her amazement, realized they were covered in some kind of spongy moss that emitted the light. Hinata turned back to report her findings to Naruto, but saw that he was already looking up at the luminous ceiling with a strange expression on his face. If she had to put it in a word, it was wistful, and it was the most emotion she'd seen from him since they'd left the village. What was he thinking about? I'm sorry I doubted you, she said at last. Without looking at her, Naruto replied, you should always confirm things with your own eyes. Even more so for someone like you. But sometimes, even my Byakugan doesn't tell me the entire truth, Hinata said softly. Naruto lowered his gaze, and she saw that his face was blank again. Let's keep moving. The roar of a summoned beast echoed through the forest, followed shortly by the deep rumbling of the ground splitting apart. Soon afterwards, the sound of 1,000 chirping birds swelled out from the trees, accompanied by sparks of lightning. From Kakashi's vantage point, he could get a general gist of the ongoing battle, and given the battering he'd undergone at the hands of his former student, he was rather glad he was all the way up here in the tree, instead of down on the forest floor. Furthermore, what with training his team, he didn't feel like he was simply twiddling his thumbs, waiting for the inevitable attack on their village. The group of missing nin calling themselves Akatsuki, the Jinchuriki, the presence of their allied villages in the Chunin exams. Even though they knew there was something tying all of these together, it seemed they could do nothing until their mysterious enemy first made a move. The tense shroud that enveloped the hidden leaf these days was not unlike what had covered the village 15 years ago, when the Ninetales had attacked. While Kakashi had been too young to be allowed in the village's main line of defense, this time around, he was more than prepared to put his life down on the line. He'd be damned if he lost anyone else without a fight. They hadn't been fast enough. Or perhaps, it had been a hopeless mission from the start. They'd found the leaf agent they had been sent out to rescue lying on the floor of the designated safe house in a puddle of congealed blood. His eyes were wide open, staring blankly up at the ceiling. A leg and an arm had been amputated, both in a single, powerful blow, by the looks of the cleanly sliced flesh. The nearest window had a missing curtain, allowing a stray ray of sunlight into the otherwise darkened room. It seemed the dying ninja had used it in an attempt at a tourniquet. Naruto watched as Hinata knelt by the body and checked for a pulse. However, it was a futile endeavor, and after a moment, she looked up at Naruto and shook her head. He's been dead at least half a day. It looks like he lost too much blood and went into shock. There was something missing here. The Hokage would not have spared a medic nin and a jonin on a futile mission. The perpetrator wasn't able to finish him off. If he had time to try and patch himself up, he should have had time to leave a message. Naruto searched the corpse, however, nothing turned up. The only thing that seemed to be there was a cold, stiffening body. To his surprise, Hinata spoke up. "Allow me, if you will." The muscles around her pale eyes grew pronounced as she activated her Byakugan. She scanned the corpse, before coming to a sudden stop at his stomach. There's something there, a message. He must have swallowed it. His stomach acids have already started to digest it, but let me see. She paused. Akatsuki is making a weapon to control the world. The leaf's Jinchuriki is their last target. Her ominous words rang in the resultant silence. A weapon. Naruto looked down at the corpse's still face, the ninja who had died for this one message. There was an old scar running down the side of his face. Naruto couldn't remember seeing anyone with his features at the village. But then again, he'd never paid too much attention to others outside his immediate circle of acquaintances. Reaching over, Naruto closed the man's eyes shut. "We have to inform the Lord Third as soon as possible," said Hinata. Getting up, Naruto nodded, that much was obvious. The question was, would they make it back in time? At a hard paces traveling, they had reached their location after 3 days. But now, the sun was already setting on the day, and the third exam would be starting early in the morning. Should he send a clone back? No, while shadow clones were hardier than your average clone, they were still vulnerable to too many attacks for them to serve use offensively against any opponent worth their salt. Then, should he leave behind the medic nin and speed back to the hidden leaf on his own? Not only would he be abandoning his duty of escorting her, it would drain him to cover that much distance using his lightning chakra. But if he summoned Amakuro? Suddenly, Naruto's head spun as a deluge of memories rushed into his mind. One of his shadow clones had been taken out. More specifically, the one he'd transformed into a coin and left with the weasel-faced crook. He'd planned on letting it linger there as a safety measure and as a potential spying mechanism. But now, it seemed, the man he'd left it with was dead. "Give you money?" said an unknown male voice. It was dark in the pocket, but the clone could still hear everything happening around him. The male voice spoke politely, and yet something about it told him its owner was not someone to be trifled with. Unfortunately, the weasel blocking the bridge must have had a rather successful day taking advantage of passing travelers, and let it get to his head. "That's right. And if you don't pay up, I'll have the police go after you." "Today's not your lucky day," said the voice. "If I wasn't alone, you might have lived." "What are you talking about, you shark-faced bastard?" Abruptly, the memory stopped there. Presumably, a single blow had taken out his clone as well. Naruto blinked again. No matter how many times it happened, it always managed to disorient him. "Naruto," said Hinata. "Right now, I'm just dead weight. But I can take care of myself. Please, go back ahead of me, and inform the Hokage of our discovery." Naruto stopped. Her too, he thought. What gave her the strength to be left behind? What had given the undercover agent the loyalty to die for this one message? What inspired Jiraiya to write books? What pushed Kakashi to train his students? They must have all had their own reasons, an answer to something that they valued above their own lives, an answer that drove them. The question was, what did Naruto have driving him? Was it the desire to be respected by the villagers? He had forsaken that dream ages ago. To gain the strength to protect those he cared about. He had already failed. To avenge the deaths of his teammates? There was nothing left to gain from their vengeance. To cling to life, to survive? No, he realized. He had nothing. There was nothing at all. During the past several days they had spent together, Hinata had not shared with Naruto her life story. He couldn't possibly know that her father had disinherited her years ago for failing to hurt her younger sister, or that she had ranked rock bottom at the Chunin exams and become a laughingstock in her clan. Naruto didn't know that for someone like her, who had been drowning in a world of senseless violence, medical ninjutsu had become her lifeline. He couldn't have known. He was a prodigy, after all. A natural in ninjutsu, and the art of assassination. But she knew that he must have had more than his fair share of troubles. And what she had sensed in their short time together was that he was not quite the monster others had made him out to be. "No," said Naruto. He held out a hand towards her, and suddenly, to her shock, lightning chakra began flickering around his form. "I won't leave you behind." If you like this content, don't forget to like and subscribe. See you later, bye bye.